metal, Robert, especially for the younger generation. We've talked about inconsistency from firouzja. He barely ever draws games. He tried to be a bit too solid in the previous one, went down to defeat, but now with white, he has to go back to original strategy of attacking Magnus, of playing on the front foot. No more playing for the draw. Even with white, that won't necessarily work out. We see the Sicilian defense, firouzja. Will he go for the open Sicilian? It's back to basics, back to his stomping ground, his home comforts of playing really fierce attacking chess. And wow, Magnus is really raising the red rag to the bull here. The Sicilian Dragon. It's going to be the year of the dragon, I have to admit, but this is a risky choice, Robert, from black.
And it's a choice that is dictated by the score of the match. Magnus Carlsen down by a point. A draw is equivalent to a loss for the second game in a row. And look at this, h5, taking control of this g4 square. How many Sicilians have we seen where white throws all the pawns up the board and creates an attack? Magnus said, no attack for you. But in doing so, it's less likely that he safely castles on over to the king side. The black king may have to stay in the center for a while, David.
Yeah, the black king, it's pretty much stranded. No way you castle kingside after pushing pawns, weakening your own kingside flank. And Magnus trading off knights. It feels like he's in kind of known territory here. I must say, fresh, brand new position for me. But look at this. Unorthodox moves, hitting the white queen this early. The dragon bishop, normally a fianchetto bishop, landing on the g7 square. Not this time, hitting the white queen, preventing queenside castles, one of white's main ideas in this opening. And Magnus surprisingly trades off. He's maybe going to turn this into a more strategic battle after the wild promise of the opening. The black rook is going to enter the semi-open c-file. There we go, rook to c8, hitting the bishop. The black queen's going to come out via a5. I must say, opening success objectively, Robert. I think black has, if not equalized, then at least is not going to be hit by a direct attack, as we're used to in the Sicilian Dragon. But is it going to be sufficient? Do you think there's enough imbalance here to hope to win long term?
It looks quite level at the moment, and I was about to say that Magnus likely going for the queen trade. They say in the Sicilian, the skeleton of the position is often favorable for black. You have traded a bishop's pawn, the c pawn, for a central pawn, this what was on d4. And so Magnus Carlsen, he just flexed his endgame muscles in the third game of the match. Why not try for it in game 4? I think so many players, David, they would think, oh, queen's off the board, it's just a draw. Not when Magnus Carlsen is playing. And actually, I think as we look across the board, there are enough imbalances in this. It's not symmetrical pawn structure that will give black some chances to try and drum up some counterplay and winning chances.
Yeah, it's that experienced advice that you dropped earlier, Robert. You've got to play the position. You've got to play the board. You cannot play for the result, especially at this early stage. Look at the black king stranded in the center. If you allow white to dodge a queen trade, if you kind of take a time out, I don't know, push a pawn to a6, white's queen will come to f4, white will blow open the center with pawn to e5, and suddenly you'll regret the opportunity. Ooh, he plays pawn to b5 instead, Magnus, and I'm already worried about that black king. Pawn to e5, the blue arrow makes yet another fateful appearance. Already the black king, oof, I'm sweating for it. Even if queens disappear now, because the weakness of the black queenside combined with the open E and D files. Look at the white rooks. So strong right now. Magnus maybe in a bit of trouble according to the eval bar. Shaking his head, Robert.
He's in huge trouble. And the reason why, his rooks are not connected. There's a rook on h8 that is not participating in this game. If you ever try to castle, down goes a pawn on e7. And white can strike on the queen side at any moment. A move like a4. Okay, I see the blue arrow. That wasn't me. What a move that would be. It's the knight on f6 is under attack. The e7 pawn is pinned. a6 is hanging. What a ridiculous, ridiculous move.
Oh, he misses it, firouzja, but rook to d6. Oh, one of the coolest, I nearly said a naughty word there, but one of the just the most magnificent double attacks you'll ever see. It's still available. Magnus cursing to himself here. Maybe he's just spotted it, shaking his head, Magnus. I think he's realizing rook d6, hitting the black knight, hitting the pawn on a6. You pin here and you win with the e-file. Oof, he missed it, firouzja, Robert, but wow, missing that opportunity. Will it come back to haunt him? That's the big question.
It's such an awkward tactic because normally you make a move like queen to d6, going for checkmate. Rook d6 was just a double attack, hitting a knight and a pawn that was an a6. Now rook d6, it doesn't actually have the same threats. The knight for sure is under attack, but there is no second attack to work with. So it's a one-move tactic, a cheapo that black will not fall for. And I have to say that white's position still looks very good. David, you asked this question earlier. Is there enough life left in the position? I think that's what firouzja is doing. He's sucking the life out of the position and saying, let's keep trading. If minor pieces come off, it's easier and easier to see a draw take form. And for Magnus Carlsen, there aren't so many imbalances the more trades that happen.
That's right. Magnus here, he wants more imbalance. And when we talk about imbalance, it's in terms of non-symmetrical, asymmetrical pawn structures. It's in terms of the selection of pieces. Often it's bishop for knight or vice versa. So I think Magnus, if he gets an opportunity, he would love to trade off, for example, the opponent's bishop for his knight. And he would love to push the black H pawn forward. He would love to play on the flank that he's stronger. But there we go, Robert. He's trading like for like, the knight for knight. As long as you keep doing that, as long as it's a rook endgame or pure bishop endgame, zero trouble at all. I think it's a really classy decision from firouzja, considering that a draw is sufficient. Look at the power of the white rooks. So nicely placed here. Black's rook on h8, still stranded, still trapped, hibernating, as we mentioned. This certainly looks like it's easily within the realms of safety for firouzja right now.
It's been the same the whole way through. This rook on h8 is not participated. It's kind of sleeping in the corner, if you ask me. So it's not involved. It needs to get involved, but I don't see a way to make that happen as the bishop is threatened. So if the king ever castles, you drop a piece. If the bishop ever moves, there's a checkmate on the last rank. So Magnus, he's going to resort to pawn e6 and king to e7. Those are his next two moves. And then we're starting to talk about a few imbalances in the sense that black has an extra central pawn. There is this pawn on e7. White has this extra pawn on c2. I think that in the long run, these central passers, they can be pushed a little bit more easily. You can see like the makings of pawn pushes here. I do feel like firouzja has everything under control, but I guess it gets uncomfortable the longer the game continues and the more I look at the clock.
Yeah. firouzja definitely thinking more in these last two games where a draw is sufficient than he did in the first two where he was able to win. Then again, I do love White's last move, king to d2. Of course, he's going to move the rook to safety now, but White's next moves could be king to c3 or king to e3, depending on which side he wants to go to. The white king does have a nice safe haven on b4, potentially. There we go. He's headed in that direction. He doesn't care about the kingside pawns. They'll take care of themselves for now. But the white king on b4 will mean that if any rook exchanges happen, white is going to win the endgame on the queen side. And I loved your description of the sleeping rook, Robert, that black rook in the corner. I did actually, a few days ago, play against Sleeping Magnus, the bot on chess.com. It wasn't the best chess player in the world, but that black sleeping rook needs to wake up at some point, just as Magnus needed to. That bot. G5, the pawns at least, have definitely awoken from their slumber.
And we can see what Magnus is aiming for. Maybe pawn f6, pawn e5, and just put all these pawns on dark squares. You actually don't know when he is going to break with a move like h3, just to ask questions of the white pawn structure. But Alireza, to this point, has responded very well. Every single move with purpose. This rook can join the party on the open a file. David, the big question, do you play this pawn push to h3? Well, the answer is clear. Next move, if you're given the opportunity, black is going for it.
Yeah, black is definitely going for that. I don't think there's even time to go harassing white. That light square bishop, rook to a6, would have run into h3. I'm really surprised firouzja hasn't committed. He hasn't blocked off that pawn advance. The reason white didn't push a pawn to h3 and just totally lock up black on the king side is because long-term pawns on light squares are big targets for the opponent's light squared bishop. So pawn to h3, maybe objectively a good move, but you imagine the black king getting into g3, getting into one of those holes. Those pawns are doomed long-term. So firouzja, he's trying to play flexible chess, keeping all the options open. He's essentially saying to Magnus, yes, it's probably level now, but you are the one who's going to have to do the hard work. And rook to d7, Robert, I mentioned rook trades long-term favoring black. Favoring white because of the active white king. Are you surprised by this decision?
Very surprised. And he has to retreat his bishop, so h3 doesn't have the same punch as it did with the bishop staring in the pawn's direction. But what Magnus is going for is what you were just talking about, David, that if white plays h3, I think I'm going to look, the engine says h3 is acceptable here, but strategically it is horrible because you see how easily the black king waltzes its way to a square like g3. So you think that for now it's okay, but in the long run, I'm going to be in trouble. So a move like h3 from the white side, super difficult to play, strategically risky. I think it's more likely that Alireza makes an active move like rook to a7, but then Magnus really can start considering ideas with a rook lift, just trying to get at white's somewhat soft pawn structure on the king side.
Yeah, you said it before. Alpha Magnus, he loves pushing those rook pawns. It's his trademark in recent years, ever since Alpha Zero in 2019. I think Magnus will just install a pawn on h3, maybe after trading on the c4 square, and then he's just going to hope it's 2 squares away from touchdown, that it becomes a new queen in the kind of not too distant future. We talk about endgames, Robert. Magnus may be the greatest endgame player of all time, especially in these types of endgames where it's not just calculation, it's about feel. It's about making practical decisions. And there we go. Pawn to h3. White will not take. White will not break his own structure. You have to bypass this pawn. But if anyone can win this endgame with black, Robert, it is Magnus.
I would say very realistic winning chances for Magnus Carlsen right now. And when you're playing against some of the younger generation, just like Magnus Carlsen did to Gukesh when they played in the World Cup, in certain endgames, a youthful player just almost by definition doesn't have the experience of getting deep down into these endgames. So the technique, it may be learned, but you have to prove it each and every time over the board, and there's so many nuances. So I love what Magnus has done here. He's created a weakness on f3. You may be tempted to push the pawn to f4, but after a series of trades, watch out. Here comes a rook to an open file. So Alireza is trying to be passive. He's trying to defend, and he's thinking that this is the best way to try and secure that half point. But David, it does seem much more natural to play from the black side. The moves come more easily.
Yeah, firouzja, he's lost control. I think it's just playing for a draw, Robert. It's on his mind a bit too much. The last game, the previous game, he went into a difficult endgame because he played negatively, passively. Here with white, okay, he missed this beautiful winning idea, rook to d6 earlier, but in general, he's been happy to trade off, happy to play the safe option on every turn, and there's no safety against the likes of Magnus Carlsen. So definitely trend on black's side. The trend is black's friend, and the king is coming. King into e5, d4, e3. You can see a clear path. What is white doing in the meantime? firouzja has to really up his game. He's still fine objectively, but 3 minutes on the clock. I do fear for him, just as you were hinting at too, Robert.
And there's so many important decisions in a game like this. f4, pawn takes. Do you want to take with the pawn or the rook? If you take with a rook, I know this may be hard for some people to visualize, then black has 2 pawns that are unopposed that can help each other down the board. And if you take with a pawn ever on f4 after a trade, you open up a g file. So there, you always see the downside of certain decisions. And for Alireza, who is down under 3 minutes, he is not going to have an easy time of this as Magnus continues to press him on the board, but more importantly, on the clock.
Yeah, Robert, and I also wanted to shout out your pattern recognition. That game against Gukesh that he ended up winning in a rook and pawn ending, black also had the f7, e6 pawn combo that started marching towards the latter stages. So, yeah, it feels like a lot of similarity there. Good move, I feel, from firouzja. The white rook didn't want to stay tied down too much longer on the passive f1 square. Now he's at least seeking counterplay. Again, a tip for everyone at home. Don't sit there. Don't suffer. Don't let your opponent just slowly keep improving. Sooner or later, you have to kind of step forward. You have to ask questions, activate your pieces. Now, Magnus, what do you feel he's going to do? Trade off pawns, bypass this pawn to g4. And you don't want your pawns on light squares, but maybe at least it keeps more pawns alive, Robert.
I think it's also tempting to look at bishop d5, trying to put pressure on a pinned piece, but white has the very simple move b3. So just to point out that you're not going to win material there. To answer your question directly, I would be tempted to capture. I just think that you may get some imbalances there, that if you play g4, maybe white pushes to f5, and I don't know if black can connect the pawns in time to keep them all safe and sound. It's not an easy choice. That's why Magnus is spending time. And David, I have to ask you, as we look at the clock, how much of a role do you think it will play?
I think it's going to play a massive role. Actually, it's not obvious, but the top players, I feel, they play much quicker in positions where it's very forcing. Even if it's tactical and a bit crazy, they make good decisions because their calculation is so fast. But when it's strategic decisions, when there's no obvious move, there's nothing forced, you have 6 or 7 kind of very sensible options on every single turn, that's where the time is burnt. That's where actually you need to invest some time. You need to have it saved up in the bank for later. I mean, look at this now. Black's bishop on a beautiful outpost. If the black rook gets to h1, white's pawn chain just collapses. So there's a clear path, a clear plan for Magnus. In terms of the clock, 2 minutes now for firouzja, no clear plan for him. And he's just trying to hold things together. A bishop trade here, Robert, will not save white necessarily.
No, because the plan is this. I know that looks ridiculous because of rook moving on a diagonal, but if this rook can sit on g2, white will not be able to take it, and that may freeze Alireza's pieces in place. David, does this remind you of the Champions Chess Tour finals from a season ago, where I think Magnus was playing against Wesley So? He had a very similar structure. In fact, he had a winning position in that game. So this pawn structure here, with that nasty pawn on h3, it can create a wedge and it can hurt your opponent, as Magnus has proven over the years.
Yeah, I remember growing up watching these rapid games where Kasparov in, I think, 1994 kept in the Sicilian night off, getting a pawn to h3 and checkmating the opponent. Now, modern kind of knowledge, modern wisdom shows that pawns on that square in endgames are also a huge trump up the sleeve for later. Has Magnus slipped up though? Bishop to e2.
Yes,
Wow.
look at his face. Look at that reaction, David. He did not see the retreating move coming.
Oh my gosh, I didn't see it coming, I must admit. I thought Black's plan, it was so straightforward, so simple. He should have got his king out of the firing line, off the d-file pin, and
wow,
Magnus agreed to draw.
So he agreed to lose the match. I mean, you can lose this game. It's the same as the draw. David, are you surprised that he wouldn't even fight? I know White objectively has everything under control, but are you surprised that he didn't continue this and give it his all?
I'm shocked. I'm gobsmacked, speechless. Just Magnus, you never nearly see him kind of willingly admit to a mistake like that. Yes, he just blundered a pawn, but one move earlier we were talking about how great his winning chances were. Ooh, opportunism there from Alireza firouzja, but so uncharacteristic. Magnus, he knows we go again. He knows today has just been extended, Robert. Alireza, he didn't do it in in the best